up, everybody? Dylan here with Dennis Kirk, and on today's episode we're going to be diving into the Harley-Davidson FX RT Sport Glide engine that we were working on a few weeks back. Now, I'm absolutely no mechanic, so I'm actually going to let Jim take it from here.
Hi, my name is Jim. I'm here with Dennis Kirk. We are working on a 1984 Harley-Davidson Evolution Big Twin engine.
Now here's a little bit of behind the scenes footage for you. In this shot here, we're actually honing a cylinder. Now the reason we're doing this is because we will be putting a new piston and rings inside of this engine. And here we actually have a shot of a technique called bead blasting. And we just used this just to give the engine a little bit cleaner, modern day look.
Prior to starting the video, we had removed the cam bearing out of the cam chest here with the cam bearing puller made by Jim's. And now we're going to reinstall the cam bearing. Important to note that when this cam bearing is being installed, there is a round edge to the cam bearing and a flat edge with lettering on it. The lettering always faces out of the engine case. You install it until it bottoms out. And that's that. Our next step is going to be to install this S&S cam. It's a 508 cam. So the cam bearing rides on the end of the camshaft. But right now what we're going to do is we're going to check for end play on the cam. That is all done by the shims for the cam shims right here. This is how we set the end play. So end play is 0 to 50 thousandths, but I like to set it up around 8 to 10. There are timing marks on the cam as well, but that doesn't matter right now when we're setting up the end play. After we get the end play set up, then we'll align the timing marks to the pinion shaft and the breather gear. What I like to do when I set up the end play is to take the old gasket, if you can save it without ruining it, put the whole thing back together, and then that's how I check my end play. End play is the movement of the shaft from end to end. So we just need a couple of bolts to hold the cover on. Not important that we torque it properly or anything like that at this point. We just want the cover to be held on to hold the cam into position so we can check our end play. Okay, now that we have the cover back on with the original gasket, we are going to set up our end play. And the end play is set up with the shims that are right on the back end of the cam here next to the engine case. Like I said, end play in the book says it's 0 to 50 thousandths, which is a crazy range. I like to set it up around 10 to 12 thou. It's not too tight, but it's not excessively loose as well. So then you can get in with a feeler gauge to check your end play between the shims and the end of the cam. And so, as you can see, I can move the cam back and forth. So we want the cam all the way out, feeler gauge, checking end play. So we got it at about, it's at around 12 thousandths right now. I'm happy with that, so we're going to leave that the way it is. So at this point, I would take the cover off, and we'll set up the timing when we'll put in a new gasket. So if you set it up tight and then put on the new gasket, it'll loosen up the end play because the gasket thickness is different. So you want to set it up tight with the new gasket. It might, you might gain a little extra end play, which is fine because 0 to 50 thousandths is tolerance. While we were disassembling this motor to do this top end job, the cylinder studs come out with the head bolts. And at that point, I decided it was time to put new cylinder studs in this motor. It's an 84. It's got over 70,000 miles on it, so it's time to put cylinder studs back in, new ones. In order to do that, you use an old head bolt and you use a ball bearing. Ball bearing goes down inside the head bolt, and when you crank down the cylinder studs, the ball bearing keeps this head bolt from locking onto the stud. Makes it easier to take it back apart without removing the stud. So at this point, we are going to go ahead and install these cylinder studs. I like to use a drop of red Loctite on each one, keeps them in place. Okay, so the stud has a shoulder on it, And so when you put it into the case, you run it in and bottom it out. So now I'm going to place the head bolt with the bearing onto the cylinder stud. So we need to make sure that you have all your openings for the lower end covered up in case this bearing falls out and goes in the bottom end of your motor, then you're in trouble. When installing, refer to your manual for proper torque specification. This is a 1/2 inch 12 point for the head bolts. Okay, so before we install the pistons and the cylinders, we want to make sure that we check the ring end gap inside the cylinder. The ring end gap can be anywhere from 7 to 20 thousandths. So we want to make sure that the end gap is proper before installation. Okay, so right now we're at a tight 18, so we're going to call it 16 to 17 thousandths ring end gap on the compression ring. And we'll keep this ring with this cylinder. It's a loose 18, it's going to be a snug 19 inch, or 19 thousandths, I'm sorry. Okay, so that's good. The top ring on this particular piston, or all pistons, will have a dot on the ring. The second ring does not have the dot, so you need to make sure that you decipher which is which. And when you find the ring that has the dot on it, the dot goes up. Okay, so I always oil everything up, right? So I'm going to start with this one here. Okay, once I get the ring in there, then I give it a little one of these, get that oil around. So now that we have the rings installed on the piston, it's important to note that the end gap are opposite of each other. You don't want the end gaps to be in line with each other. So you spin them about 90 degrees from each other, that'll be good. Otherwise you have problems with oil and compression. All right, we're good to go. Okay. Don't know how long this motor is going to sit without ever being run. So we're going to lube these cylinders up so they don't rust. All right, in order to get the cylinder down over the piston, we use a ring compressor. Without it, you will be struggling getting the cylinder back on. So what I like to do before I actually install the head bolts to hold, for holding the heads down, what I like to do is I put a little bit of oil on the threads inside the head bolt, and I like to put a little bit of anti-seize around the mating surface of the head bolt. And the reason I like to do that is because it gives me a proper torque. So I use the little anti-seize and some oil. It just gives you a lot better a torque, the true reading of when you torque it down, and it keeps it from gulling. And so I just repeat that for the rest. Okay, now that I have these heads they're ready to be torqued down. So there's a pattern. You go 1, 2, 3, 4. And it's increments of torque. So the first round is going to be 10 foot-pounds. The next round will be 15, 20, and then we're going to finish it off with 42 foot-pounds of torque. That's recommended by James Gaskets. We're using a metal base gasket, which is the best gasket for these Evolution motors, I believe. So this particular bike, we're going to use the adjustable push rods as opposed to the solid push rods that are factory. But when you use the solid push rods from the factory and you go to put on your top rocker arm assembly, you have to draw it down equally. Otherwise you could stand a chance of breaking the rocker box itself. But that is the preload. That's how you set the push rods, is by bringing the rocker box down onto the push rod. This is the rocker arm assembly. This is the first part of the head that goes on. There's two different size bolts, hardware. So what happens is, when disassembling, you always want to take the smaller out first, because this is what's holding the load down on the spring pressure. So if you were to take the bigger bolts out first, you stand a chance of stripping the holes out, because these smaller bolts will not take the strength of the spring pressure. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and torque down the rocker box. The smaller bolts are 12 to 14 foot-pounds, and the top are 15 to 18 foot-pounds. All right, so the push rods are different length. The longer is for the exhaust, because that's the farthest of travel. The shorter are for the intake, and obviously less travel. So I'm going to go ahead and pop these in. I just use some simple rubber bands and paper clips to hold these push rod tubes out of the way while I make my adjustment here at the push rod. What you do before you go ahead and start your adjustment is you want to make sure that the push rod has no up and down movement. You open the push rod up until you get rid of that up and down movement, and that's where you can start your adjustment. So right there, I'm pretty good right there. I'm going to mark my flat, and we're going to go 4 full revolutions. It's very important that you take your time when you're adjusting the push rods, because what's happening is, when the lifters are full of oil and you're adjusting the push rod, you're putting pressure on the lifter, and the oil is escaping the lifter. It's bleeding down is what they call it. And so when you make your adjustment, the push rod won't be able to spin. So what's important is that after you let it bleed down, which, it could take a few minutes per push rod, it might give yourself at least 5 minutes per push rod. But when you're done and it's bled down properly, you should be able to spin the push rod freely. There should be no resistance. It should spin freely with no up and down play. Put the push rod clip in, take the screwdriver, push down, slide it in. So now that we got the top covers on the rocker box assembly, what's important is this center D-ring needs to be centered between the bottom and the top plate. It can be off, so you want to make sure that you get it almost as equal all the way around as possible before you're snugging everything down. So I just put a little bit of pressure on this rocker cover to keep it in place. So it should feel uniform. This D-ring shouldn't be sticking out or pushed in at any position on this as you're putting this together. And the reason for that is just to prevent any leaks coming from you want to have as much of the gasket surface contacting the gasket as possible. And we just go ahead and do it on the other side as well. So now we're going to torque these. We're going to torque these screws down to 95 inch-pounds. And we're going to do that in a crisscross pattern. Get them all snugged down, and then we'll go for the final torque.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it. And if you guys like this video, don't forget to smash that like button, comment, share, and subscribe for more future Dennis Kirk content. And while you're at it, check out our brand new and improved website, where it's now easier than ever to find exactly what you're looking for on your ride. Don't forget, Dennis Kirk ships the same day you order. So, the best part about getting those parts is getting out there and testing them. I'm Dylan with Dennis Kirk, and we'll see you guys next time. For more information on the products listed in this video, click on the link in the description area below. Feel free to call us with any questions or place an order at 800-969-7501. Don't forget to smash that like button, comment, share, and subscribe for all of the latest DK events, videos, and promos.